Automation is making even the most complex tasks easier and faster. This has led a growing number of businesses to look at everything they do and try and figure out how they can digitize it. Both large and small enterprises are being increasingly challenged to squeeze every bit of inefficiency and redundancy out of commonly performed tasks to reduce costs, save time, and, ideally, minimize errors. But what about things that are typically more personalized, such as consulting or advisory? Can even that be digitized? I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for joining me here on A Seat at the Table and being part of our global community of industry leaders. Today we have Stefan Debois joining us. Stefan is CEO of Pointerpro, an assessment software platform that helps professional services companies to automate their advisory processes. If you were wondering how consulting services could be digitized, and I know I was, then stay tuned because Stefan will be sharing how to digitize your consulting services to deliver advice to clients at scale, and why consultants need to stop charging their clients by time. In this episode, you'll learn how to digitize a highly customized business like consulting or advisory service, how consultants need to rethink the consultant-client dynamic, why it's better to base consulting contracts on outcomes or results rather than on hours worked, and the most effective strategies and tactics for successfully bootstrapping a business. No matter how much you digitize your business, ultimately you need top talent who can drive growth, build customer or supplier relationships, or successfully lead teams. That's why top corporations and even smaller enterprises rely on AsiaNet consultants to help them fill key positions. Since 1988, AsiaNet has been working in partnership with its global clients to help them make the right strategic hires. They have a well-earned reputation for being able to fill even those difficult-to-fill positions. So if you need to recruit new talent, or you think you might be doing that soon, head on over to their website. That's asianetconsultants.com, asianetconsultants.com. There'll also be a link in the show notes. Okay, now it's time to sit down with Stefan and learn how we can digitize even those more customized aspects of our business. Well, Stefan, I'm really happy to have you on A Seat at the Table. I think that what you're talking about is interesting, and I haven't heard anyone else talking about this aspect of being able to automate before. So I think it's interesting that you're able to bring something new to us, something that I think that most people who are listening to this probably are not familiar with.
Yeah, thank you for having me. The way to automate professional services, pretty new thing, because what we see is that professional services firms often have automated their back office pretty decently, like invoice processing, timesheets, and so on. And that is all typically covered by digital. But the actual advice delivery to clients is often not at all digitized. Yeah? And that's the point of focus of myself and of my company, Pointerpro. So, but before being able to digitize as a consultant or a professional service company, you need to have a model, like a business model that represents or that can be used to measure the performance of your clients. So say that you are, for example, a cybersecurity consultant or consulting company, then you should have a kind of cybersecurity maturity model, we can call it, where you can measure your customers, let's say from a scale from 0 to 5, or it can be another scale also. Whereas 0 is that they are absolute beginner and that they are at the really first step in cybersecurity, and the most advanced being 5. And having such a model it's better to have a model and to not have it digitized or not have it in a digital tool than having no model at all. Yeah. So the first thing is that you have to develop that model, that you have to put it on paper or on slideware or Microsoft Word, wherever. And then as a second step, you can start digitizing that model. Yeah. So you can put that model in a tool like in our tool, or it can also be an Excel tool, or because that's more flexible to start with, but afterwards you will have to put it in a more professional tool where you ask people questions, for example, about cybersecurity or about your subject matter, and then they answer these questions, and you use these answers to determine the maturity level of your customers or your prospects. Yeah? So that's one step, so that you use the model to measure. And then the next step is that you not only use the model to measure, but also give automatic advice based on those measurements. For example, if you score 2 out of 5 on the cybersecurity maturity scale, then you will say, okay, you have to do this. These are your top priorities to reach level 3. And that is also happening automatically. So if you can achieve that, then that means that you're automating not your full services, of course, but part of your services, especially the onboarding, the initial phase. You can call it diagnostic phase or a cybersecurity scan, or what you have to do as a consultant in the beginning to get to know the situation at your client and to define the actions to improve.
I think that's really interesting. You're in a sense using this kind of a quiz, but probably a little more detailed than a quiz, in a sense to diagnose the problem, and then you have already pre-formatted a certain number of solutions for people.
Exactly. And that accelerates the process to start a consulting assignment. When I was consultant back in the days, like it was more than 15 years ago, one of my first projects that I came on, but I was still a junior consultant, they were doing, the project has been running during 6 months already. And I was really wondering what they had done in these 6 months, but I didn't dare to ask because I was junior. And then I asked it like anyways. And then they said, they did the as-is mapping, like mapping of the as-is situation. And then they showed me hundreds of pages of PowerPoints with all these nice flowcharts and so. That is not anymore acceptable in these days. Like the time to business value, the customer expects that much shorter, of course, than 6 months. And we don't have time to do 6 months as-is mapping. So tools like our tool, which provides an automatic diagnostic, can help accelerate that process.
So that leads me to want to ask then, and I'm sure it's different within every industry and then even within different departments within companies in the same industry. Have you found that the typical problems amongst, even if it's a particular industry, there's just a certain number, or do you find that you really need to expand this and have many, many more possibilities? I think I'm not explaining that very precisely, but in other words, how big is that tree from initially entering that quiz process, right? I mean, how many different variations can you go down? How many different routes?
Yeah, it's indeed, you have to find a balance between it may not be too generic, otherwise the advice is like, tell me something new kind of things.
Right.
But it cannot be too detailed also, because otherwise it takes forever to answer the questions. So somewhere a balance that has to be found. But if a consultant typically has experience, let's take again the cybersecurity example. If that consultant or that company has done many projects in cybersecurity, maybe specialized in something in, I don't know, cybersecurity for small retail shops or chains, and they have done project after project, they always almost have an implicit model in their head that when they come to the next customer prospect, that they already know, okay, they are doing well on this dimension, they are doing less well there. So there we have to focus our efforts. So implicitly, they already have it. And it's often not that difficult to, if you have the expertise, if you have people that have the expertise to derive the model, to check which questions that you have to ask and to put in the model. A good technique is also, if you have good salespeople, and salespeople in professional service are often blended with the consulting professionals, because there's a lot of consultative selling. No salesperson will start by immediately proposing a solution.
Right.
Before listening to the client or the prospect. That's not the way to go. Every salesperson will start by asking questions. So it's exactly those questions that you put in the assessment and that you use to qualify the problem, to qualify the customer, and then to give advice, to give tailored advice afterwards.
So then, strength of the system is that it evolves over time. and that because you're doing so much of this, you are able to see what the real commonalities are, what the less obvious problems are, but that you see coming up all the time, what might be the better solution. So you're able to refine that system so that it very specifically meets the needs of the people using it without any extra that isn't needed, right? So that you're able to really refine it down.
Exactly. As you gain more experience by doing more services, more projects as a professional service provider, you can refine the system. You can have like multiple assessments. For example, a digital marketing agency could have a generic assessment for digital marketing, could have one for content marketing, one for digital PR, one for email marketing. And yeah, that can evolve in such a way, exactly. And then also, I think those assessments can be used also as a retainer, not only to start up a project, but also as a retainer, for example, every 6 months to do such an assessment and to check the improvements that the customer has made, hopefully thanks to the services of the consultant.
Right. So even though your system
the system itself is automated, but the setup of the system is manual. So you have to set it up once, plus the refinements afterwards. But the setup is not automatic, so you have to sit around the table with experts to check which questions to ask, to qualify the performance of the customer, to see which advice you give depending on which answer that they have given to the questions, and so that's manual. But the advantage is once you have done this work and you have put it in the system, then it can give advice on autopilot. Basically, you can deploy it at many clients or at many people or employees or whatever the target is of your assessment.
I think that's really interesting, and it certainly cuts out a lot of what's essentially very repetitive. It's also time consuming, it's expensive, so you're able to bridge that gap of being able to provide people with this information without, sort of capitalizing on the fact that a lot of it is somewhat redundant and somewhat repetitive by having this automated system. Now, it leads me to the next question, which is, on the one end of the scale, right, you have this highly personalized consulting where it's one-to-one, labor-intensive. You're really sitting down with somebody and listening to what they have to say and providing a somewhat bespoke solution. But on the other end, nowadays, right, there's a lot of information in the public domain that's freely accessible. I mean, massive amounts, right? Even things, open universities that are taught by professors from some of the world's best universities. There's virtually nothing you can't really learn online. So how does this kind of automated consulting, how does that fit in between those two extremes? We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
If you're a pet owner who wants real talk on training, behavior, and everyday life with animals, check out the Fresh Patch Podcast. Hosted by Drew and Gabe, we cover the wins, the challenges, and everything in between. So wherever you listen, search the Fresh Patch Podcast, where good pets get it.
Yeah, I think indeed there's a lot of information available online, free or very, very accessible, very cheap in books or on the internet. Yeah, probably the outcome of the advice reports that results from our assessments. Content is somewhere on the internet or somewhere in one of those books. But the problem there is that I am a customer. Again, I'm in need of cybersecurity services because we see that there is a threat and we want to be secure. Then I can read a book about cybersecurity. Then I first have to search which book, because there are like hundreds of them. And then that book contains maybe a lot of advice, and then I have to know which advice to implement first, depending on my specific situation. So there comes the problem, of course, that like all the advice that I need to implement is probably in the book. But I'm not interested in all the advice. I'm just interested in someone who says, like, based on your situation, you should do this one. This first step is this, second step is this, third step is that. And the book, because it's a static piece of content, will not be able to tell me that in such a personalized way. And that is, of course, where the assessments come in. So it's in fact, the book has to be reverse engineered someone has to say which questions I need to ask the reader of the book to reduce the content of the book from 200 pages to 5 pages, but these 5 pages contain every step and only what is relevant for this specific reader.
Right. So in other words, what you're able to do is to distill this so that the person is getting just what they need, as opposed to having to sift and sort through a tremendous amount of information, even if that information is quite good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Now, you talk about the shift that needs to happen where consultants change from charging for their time to charging based on results or outcomes. How does that work? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we have a kind of strong point of view about that, also resulting from my own experience in consulting. Being that like time and material, like being that you bill by the hour or by the day that you've worked as a consultant, that is a suboptimal way to charge your services, because it's the only advantage of time and material is that it's easy.
Okay.
For the rest is only disadvantages, because for the customer, we also source professional services quite often, and I like to have, as a customer, to be sure of what I will get and also to be sure what I will pay for that. Yeah?
Right.
So that's a fixed price, fixed result. So I prefer that rather than time and material as a customer. And then as a service provider, if you charge time and material, kind of a symptom of not being able to determine the real value of your work, because you assume that the value of your work is proportional with the time that you have spent, which is almost always an underestimation. So then if you would have a way to make a fixed price, then you also are more incentivized as a consultant to apply improvements, efficiency improvements through digitization or other means. And then this will not penalize you, because if you make improvements in time and material and say you can do the same work with less effort, and then you will charge less, which is not good. Whereas in the fixed price, like you will charge maybe the same or a little bit less, but your work that you have spent will be much less and your profitability will be higher. So
Right.
you're much more incentivized to apply improvements to your way of working.
It's an interesting way to look at it, because you're right. It's always a conundrum. On the one hand, when you work with a consultant or a service provider, you don't want to pay for things that you don't need. If you're paying, like you said, per hour, per day, there's not a lot of incentive for that service provider to work any more efficient or faster, right? Because in a sense, it's to their advantage to drag it out as long as possible. But on the other hand, they also, how do you incentivize them to be more efficient without them actually losing money on the deal?
So the way that you can move, I understand that for time and material, when you start off, or when you have services that are difficult to maybe predict or quantify the outcome, then that could be a compromise to build time and material. But as you move on, you will focus on certain service offerings. When you doing projects over and over in that same domain, for example, a cybersecurity scan for a small retailer, you do it over and over, and then you have done it 10 times, 15 times. Then there should be a moment that you say, look, okay, it's always the same deliverable that I'm doing, and you have optimized that, of course, always the same deliverable that is resulting from that project. And also it's always kind of the same work that you have to do to perform that project. So if you generalize that deliverable, and the next client or the next prospect, the 16th, you say, okay, I'm not going to charge time and material, but I show you the deliverable, and this is what you're going to get. And you have an idea which work it takes you to make that deliverable, and you make a fixed price based on an estimation based on that work. Then you move towards a more fixed price. offering, which is the way to go.
I think that's interesting, and I think that for the hiring company, in a sense, a fixed price is better because you're able to better manage your budget. This is what I'm going to get, this is going to pay for it. Whereas when it's on an hourly or daily rate, sometimes you don't really know how long it's going to take. There's an estimate, right? So you could end up unhappy with the fact that you actually need to invest more budget in order to complete the job. So I can see why that's also good for the consultant, because they've put a certain price on delivering a certain outcome or solution. But when you talk about charging by outcomes, I mean, is that simply this is how much work we're going to get done for you? Or is it an actual level of success? Because that could be very much more difficult, right, to benchmark.
And the first stage, I would say it's a certain set of deliverables.
Right.
For example, it's in the cybersecurity scan, it could be like an advice report showing your score or the score in the different categories, and then the advice on how to proceed. And then you can show like an example report from another customer, because people want to see something tangible, and then they can see, okay, this is something similar that I will get. Yeah. So that's a first stage. Then in second stage, of course, you can do it performance based, but then, yeah, you of course have to have a good idea on the performance that you will reach. But if you can predict that pretty accurately, that's certainly an attractive model, because yeah, it's win-win or lose-lose, but win-win in the best case, of course. If the customer, if I'm personally as a customer, I don't mind to pay a bit more if the performance is reached, and if someone can predictably, say me that a certain performance will be reached, that's worth something, and I'm prepared to pay for that.
Right. So in other words, what you would do is you would have this priced sort of, this is what it costs for these deliverables, and then this might be what extra you might pay if we are able to achieve this specific outcome on top of that.
Yeah, that could be a model indeed. Yeah.
Okay. I think it's interesting because, of course, like you said, people are always willing to pay a bit more if it's tied into an outcome. But on the other hand, sometimes as a service provider, even someone who is very experienced and has the absolute best intentions, the highest level of integrity, you really have a lot of things you can't control in terms of that actual outcome.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. And that should be, of course, entered in assumptions then, that, for example, if there is certain information that the client has to deliver to be able to achieve the outcome, that this is assumed that the client is going to deliver those things. So it's true, and that's why I say time and material is easy. There you don't have to do that, but in a fixed price you will do that probably as part of the contractual agreement.
Right. I think that makes sense. And it's interesting that you bring this up, because certainly so many business models are under evaluation, shall we say, being disrupted by new ways of looking at things. And certainly consulting is one of them. So if I'm understanding you correctly, then you would start off by having this quiz-based automated system where people could enter your website or enter some kind of a relationship with you, go through the quiz-based, get all of this kind of feedback at either a much reduced price, and then from there they could take it to the next level where you would be working with the client on more of a bespoke kind of a project basis. Am I understanding?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the quiz-based or the scan or the diagnostic, you can call it, it comes in different names. That can be, I would only make a small subset of like a stripped down version for free that you put on the website. For example, cybersecurity assessment of like 15 questions and a very concise report, just as a teaser. But then as from the next step, I would make it paid, and if it's good quality, if it bundles all your expertise, then customers normally don't have a problem to pay for like a diagnostic project, which is then more extensive, like more questions and more dimension, and also more bespoke, like a meeting to discuss the outcome and so on. That should be a paid offering, I think. And the result of that should be a detailed roadmap on how to improve and how your services or external services can contribute to that.
Okay. So it's really step by step, free, but sort of like a light version, paid, automated, but still paid because you're getting that customized report for you and perhaps a brief meeting. And then the final step would be if they wanted to actually dive deeper or have you work with them, being the consultant, work with them in a more bespoke way.
Then you go for an implementation project where they implement their solution or the recommendations, or someone else does it. They are like pure strategy consultants. That's also possible. And then you have a retainer, for example, every 6 months to check performance and to suggest even like more improvements, that you have like a kind of insurance that the performance like stays as desired.
Okay. I think that's really interesting. Off the top of your head, roughly how much, and I know it varies a lot by industry, by client, by project, but is there just even a general ballpark figure of about how much a client might save through this new method of consulting services, through your automated version of consulting services?
Yeah, that's indeed difficult to say. In a scenario where you assess the individual employees, which is like, for example, we have a customer that is doing an employee well-being assessment for their clients. Yeah? And then after this assessment, they have an idea on which problems employees have, and then they can act on that. Yeah, for that specific scenario, we have like reports like per employee assessment. It can easily be 20 or 30 minutes that is gained versus when you do it manually. And we know that these consultants work for companies like with thousands and thousands of employees, so then you can easily calculate that significance.
Okay, so the savings can really be quite significant. I think it's such an interesting new development that, like you said, it really disrupts the way we've always done things and finds a way that's more efficient and that benefits both sides.
Yeah, exactly. But you, as I said in the beginning, you don't have to go immediately for the full digital solution. The important thing is that you create a model, that you document it, and the most simple way is in your expertise domain, like your ideal customer. Where is he before you enter the project, before you come in, the customer, and where will he be afterwards, like on a maturity scale, 0 to 5 or 1 to 5. And then try to define those different levels and try to also check which questions you have to ask to determine if a customer is at a certain level. Like just having that on paper or in a PowerPoint is already very powerful.
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a legacy of success in building B2B software, Stefan. How have you bootstrapped your way to success? I think a lot of people would be very curious to hear about what you've done and what strategies or tactics have really moved the needle for you.
Been a consultant for 15 years, and now I founded my own software company, Pointerpro, then 10 years ago, so I can compare both jobs or both situations. And indeed, it's always good to bundle your expertise that you have acquired during your consulting or other job, if you have subject matter expertise, and to try to make like a software product that uses that expertise. So that's certainly a good thing to do, because that's also a way to leave the typical consulting where you have like your reward is based on the time that you work, basically, towards a more towards putting your expertise or your experience into a system that then makes or creates the revenue for you. In this case, it's a software system. Now, specifically for myself, when we created Pointerpro, it was still called Survey Anyplace. So then we focused more on surveys instead of assessments. And the way to bootstrap it for us, like in the beginning, the main lead generation channels were like search engine optimization combined with content marketing. But the content marketing, the content was specifically written for SEO purposes. So for example, you could make a landing page for a type of survey, a white label survey, customer satisfaction survey, these kind of things. And then people would search for that on Google or other search engines and then come on your website. So that was the first tactic that we used. And then afterwards, we started to do also paid advertising. When we had the assessment offering with the personalized reports, that was a higher value offering. So we were able to charge more to the customers. And then paid advertising becomes more justified because paid advertising also comes at a cost. So paid is mostly Google Ads and also a little bit of Bing and Cap. And then the third tactic, which is now only starting, is basically the top of mind marketing or like thought leadership. I know it's a bit an overused word, but okay, I mean we have to use it anyway. So that's basically to become less dependent on Google, go more top of funnel, and the ultimate goal is that people of our target audience know us already before they need a product like ours. Yeah. So that's the thing that I was doing, the way that I was evangelizing also before, not only purely selling my product, but trying to sell the idea behind it, like the fact that a consultant needs to have a model, needs to think about when they've done a similar project several times, which expertise can be or reused, put it in a model, check which questions to ask to determine the performance of his clients. These kind of things that the consultant should do that. I need to evangelize, and people should be convinced about that. And then when they are convinced, of course, and they're looking for a digital tool to do these things, then they will probably also use my tool because they also already see me as an authority in that space.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The importance of building your image as an authority prior to trying to get people to buy something. I think that we overlook how important that is, and certainly the amount of time and effort that goes into it. Time being the timeline of how long it takes to build up that traction, and effort in terms of doing all those things. I mean, what have you found in that, if you were looking at how long it took you and so forth?
Yeah, for the first steps, the SEO and content marketing, back in the day, it was easier than now.
Right.
Because it was 10 years ago, the market was not that crowded. So it was not, I would say, not that difficult. It still took like SEO, like 6 months to a year to see like a decent traction. And then of course the paid ads, that's immediate because you just have to spend the money, of course. And then the thought leadership and authority building, we just started, so it's difficult to say, but we are not naive, and we certainly think that before 6 months, a year, you don't have to expect any tangible results. Also, the results are more difficult to measure than, for example, in paid ads. Paid ads, you can immediately see how many leads are generating. You have all the numbers and so. But in like with podcasts and like with content marketing and all these things, it's more difficult to measure. You can measure the audience build. I think we should step away from just trying to measure only lead generation. We should measure the audience build up or the audience development. And then I'm talking about engaged audience. And if you have an engaged audience, as I say, if they know you as an authority, then when they need a product like yours, they will come to you also.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's amazing how that works. Now, if you were looking at this today, you said you did this 10 years ago, and you're absolutely right that it was a heck of a lot less crowded market. It was still very competitive, but nothing like now. If you were looking at it now, if you were starting something new, right, now, what would you be guesstimate on timeline or on the things we were just talking about that moved the needle for you back then?
Yeah, first, I didn't mention that, but first I used, of course, my existing network.
Right.
But then, yeah, pretty quickly you have to step out to go beyond your network. Yeah, for now, I think if you have the same tactics as back then, like instead of 6 months, it would maybe take a year or a bit more. So I would say hang on. Persistence is key. And I try to combine or try out different tactics at the same time and see what works the best, and then double down on that. I think if you're in a good niche, I think combination SEO and content marketing can still work for sure. If I would do it again, I would start the authority building like earlier.
Well, Stefan, you have really shared so many interesting things, and I think it's exciting to hear what's happening with consulting and how digitization is being brought through. How can people reach out to you? How can they get in touch?
Yeah, on social media, I think it's best to go on LinkedIn, where I'm pretty active. So you can simply look up my name and connect with me, or write me a message. I'm happy to help. And then, if you're interested in our product, then you can go to our website, pointerpro.com, where you find, of course, the product itself, but also like a lot of blog articles and case studies about how to digitize your professional services.
I will be putting your links and contact information in the show notes so that people can reach out. Stefan, I want to thank you so much for taking the time for joining us here on A Seat at the Table. I've really learned a tremendous amount from you.
Thank you, Jane, for having me, and looking forward to the episode.
A big shout out to our sponsor, AsiaNet Consultants. AsiaNet is a specialist in recruiting top talent in Asian markets. Since 1988, AsiaNet has been working in partnership with its global clients to help them make the right strategic hires. They have a well-earned reputation for being able to fill even those difficult-to-fill positions. To learn more about how AsiaNet Consultants can help you find the best talent, check out their website at asianetconsultants.com. That's asianetconsultants.com. Thank you for joining me here on A Seat at the Table. If you enjoyed this episode or learned something from it, I'd love to hear about it. If you'd like to support the show, please hit the subscribe button. And if you can take a minute to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or other channels, that would be fabulous. And check out our podcast website, where you can find all of the episodes of A Seat at the Table and Launch to Legendary. That's seatpodcast.com, SEAT podcast.com. And if there's something you'd like to share, ideas, suggestions, or comments, please feel free to reach out. I would love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining me here today and being part of our professional community. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast.